We are just inside Rainier National Park, along one of the beautiful small streams that flows from the glaciers of Mount Rainier on all sides. This is an extremely rich environment. Notice the huge trees across from us. But notice also that there is a large abundance of old giant trees that have fallen or are in the process of falling and will be subject to decay. Now, all throughout this area, everything seems to be covered by moss. Moss indicating a capacity to live off of the host or to live independently, such as on this rock before you. The ground is also littered with evidence of ancient trees that have fallen that are now in their last stages of complete decomposition. Notice the one in front of us. As we pan up the hill, there in front is a huge stump. Not a huge one, but a stump to the right. And notice just to the left, coming down at an angle, is another faint image of an ancient tree that is well on its way to complete decomposition. Notice also on how rich this environment is. Here's some evidence of it. Notice on this rock that there are small saplings of a bush or some kind of a tree, probably some kind of a bush, growing right on top of the rock, right in the moss. What happens in this environment is that the soil becomes tremendously rich. The surface is covered probably with several feet of an extremely rich humus soil, conducive to growing almost anything. Now, unlike the rainforest, where huge amounts of material may drop to the surface and decompose rapidly, be washed down through the soil and immediately absorbed by the extremely high canopy type of vegetation trees. Here, the accumulation on the ground appears to far exceed what would be required to grow what we see here. An extremely rich environment dominated by a great deal of moisture on an almost daily basis, either in the form of rain or in the winter snow, or even the fog of the many clouds that roll across and storms that roll across this part of the United States. Another difference that you will notice between this forest and the forests of the rainforest is the middle story. The middle story is very dense, or reasonably dense, with branches and varying sized trees, as opposed to the rainforest, in which it is basically barren. It may well be that the floor of the rainforest is somewhat similar to this, in that it's not that dense, because very little light gets down here, or down there. But here, where there is some light, and normally along streams even with the rainforest, you will see vegetation down on the ground level. This is weather that is typical of these mountains in southwest Washington state. Oftentimes clouds, seldom can you see the top of Mount Rainier. But it's this all-pervading moisture that allows the tremendous variety and volume of plant life. This is an alpine lake up on the side of Mount Rainier in Washington, probably formed from a glacier that came down through this valley, which I'll show you in a moment. It probably was a complete glacial trough, but at some point in time, at the head of the glacier, it deposited its last major moraine, which is a deposit of that material carried downhill by a glacier, and that blocked the glacial trough, if you will, and created the lake. And where that probably came from is, as we pan up through here, you'll notice that I'm actually in a little bit of a trough, and as I look over here, you can see in the middle of the picture there's a trough. As we go up further on, back up into that area is where the glacier probably originally was. In fact, some of the snow that you see up there now, just slightly below the cloud line, probably or might still be considered glacial by the definition that we use of glaciers. We are standing before a large area in which various phases of logging have taken place. And next to us is a board that tends to explain this area, and so we'll refer to that. Section number 1, which is this area apparently over here that looks like it's the newest cut area, in other words devoid of any tall pine trees, up on that little hill there as we pan across here, relatively close to us. This is what the board has to say on that. Recently harvested, early 1990, western hemlock, white fir, western red cedar. Next harvest, 2050. That'll be another 60 years. That's apparently what they consider to be the turnaround time for the growth of forests. There appears to be some dispute on that fact, some people alleging it takes 100 years or more. Perhaps that depends upon the kind of soil, the kind of climate, and the kind of tree that you are planting. Here, new trees grow from seeds already in the soil and others that drift in. If necessary, seedlings will be planted to supplement natural seeding. Stumps and other debris were not burned, encouraging slow decay, which returns more nutrients to the soil. And yet, in many of the places I've been, you can see where fire has at least occurred. Whether it was purposely planted or happened by mistake is a good question. Small trees remain along the road. Larger trees open to the wind are a danger to motorists and must be removed. And yet, could we not ask, how deep could the forest be from the road in order to make the trees that remain safe, and at the same time preserve the beauty of the area, at least as seen by those who use the roads. Insects, animals, and birds use the open harvested area. Trees are left along streams to prevent erosion and provide shade. As they age, trees tumble into streams, protecting water quality and fish habitat. Remaining trees and undergrowth provide food, shelter, and nest sites. How would you think that trees tumbling into the streams to protect water quality and fish habitat? Area number 2 is this area relatively close to us, where these stumps are, some of which are burned. Here, in this area, the board indicates that they were harvested in 1987. The limbs and debris were burned. Sometimes burning is necessary, it says, to give young conifers sunlight and space to sprout and grow. This area was planted with Sitka spruce. Seedlings are still small. Trees visible from the highway are usually 5 or 6 years old. The next harvest, 2047. An interesting question. What does the next harvest mean to those of us who use the roads? Does it simply mean that we'll be able to watch a forest grow, and yet, as soon as it is grown, it will be ripped down again and the process will begin again? To say the least, it is an unsightly end result of this process. The fourth area are these dark trees opposite us, and those are what has grown since 1921, when a huge hurricane in this area flattened that area. And it's primarily western hemlock. Around us is evidence of very, very large trees that were cut down. Here is an excellent example. Have we lost something by the elimination of these trees? Is it possible in 60 years that we could ever see trees like this? Probably not. I would suspect that the tree ahead of us is at least 100 years, if not 200 years old.
Do you know how far the drive is here? Yeah, let's see. That should take 2 hours. Yeah. Takes an hour to get here.
This is the Sitka spruce, which tends to identify this area as a temperate rainforest. Can reach 300 feet high. Scaly purplish gray bark and needles that are sharp to the touch. Notice that there's no branches on the middle story, only when you get to the top. Here on this log, growing on the log, off of the decomposing wood inside the log, are several small saplings of trees. Eventually, one or more of these trees will wrap its roots completely around the log as it grows, and that will cause one of these samplings someday to appear to have had a log all the way underneath it, which of course will be true. Like this log immediately to, or this huge tree to the left. This hole that you see here was at one time a log that fell and decomposed and became the nurse log, if you will, for this huge tree. And in this way, there is no breaking of hands, there is continuity in the growth and the regrowth of forests. Here's an old dead standing tree that is rotting as it stands, but it provides a tremendous supermarket for woodpeckers, as you can see from the holes they have drilled into this tree. On many of these trees are what's called a shelf fungus. What you can't see are the roots that go deep inside the tree and help to decompose it. Here's a very good example of a tree that grew around a larger tree which has since decomposed. Now here are trees growing out of a root system of a large tree that sometime over the course of the last number of years has fallen and become fodder or food for many other plants and trees. Notice the shelf fungus all the way up this tree. The important thing to remember is that each of these has deep, long roots that go down inside the tree, helping to accelerate its decomposition. This area was a recent riverbed area, as opposed to the riverbank area that we have just passed through. Notice how little floor vegetation there is, and yet the moss is already heavily involved on the trees. Another interesting feature of this riverbed area of the rainforest is that now spruce and hemlock are in the process of replacing the original trees. This is an example, of course, of what's called plant succession. Notice that the ferns as well as the moss grow on the trees themselves. Notice that the ferns as well as the moss, grow on the trees themselves. I'm not sure if you can detect that the color of the water is a milky gray or whitish color. And what this is evidence of glacial runoff farther up the Hoh River Valley, coming off of the Hoh Glacier, which is on Mount Olympus. And what this simply is the rock of which the mountain is made having been pulverized into a dust and now mixed and in solution, if you will, or suspension, with the water itself. And directly across from us are the Roosevelt, or correction, the Olympian elk that people or populate this area, and frankly do a fine job in keeping down the underbrush so that other things can grow rather than just certain types. You notice she has a little calf behind her there. This forest is so dense it's difficult to see wildlife unless, for some reason like these two, they choose to come out.
Pardon? Is there on what type of bird? There's another. What?
Here's another excellent example of a nurse log and what's called a colonnade. In other words, a series of trees that have formed along one fallen tree create in essence a row of columns of trees. This is an example of several saplings, a number of saplings that grew around a dead stump, which you can see right in the center. And as they grew, the first ones to have their roots reach the bottom, in other words, reach the ground, were able to survive, grow large, and crowd out the remainder. They eventually grew so that from the bottom first 10 or 15 feet, they look as though they're one tree. Again, an example of the intimate intertwining between growth and regrowth. A superb example of a nurse log and the colonnade of trees that it has created. Even if these trees, if the nurse log had completely molded away, the line, straight line that these Sitka spruce form would tell us how they formed it. Another small stand of trees growing right on top of the nursing log, and that someday, like the example we've seen earlier, will grow its roots down to the ground, and eventually there will be here a colonnade of trees. Notice how clear this spring-fed stream water is. This is the early morning setting. This is the broadleaf maple, which also typifies a temperate rainforest, and is the tree to which the moss and lichen most like to attach themselves to. Notice the hanging sheaths, almost draperies, of this air-breathing plant life. One question arises, and that is why or how do little trees grow on top of existing logs? And why does it seem to only occur in a rainforest environment rather than, let's say, the environment of the Tetons or in the North Woods of the United States and Canada? And I think one of the key reasons must be that the rotting or decomposition of a log can begin at the top of the log rather than at the bottom of the log, such as found in the northwest, or correction, in the northern forest areas. And I think the reason for that is the intense amount of rainfall and precipitation of all sorts that lands primarily and first, of course, on the top of the tree trunk. to the extent where when you look at the lower part of the tree, it appears definitely to be deteriorating at a slower rate than the top. And the rate of deterioration is also a factor. Let's get as close as we can to this, and I'll try and show you what's happening with this. See how this just breaks apart. It's just completely, not completely rotted yet, but lost a great deal of its structure. You can just pull it apart with your fingers. See what I mean? And so it's very easy for tree roots of saplings to get inside of this rapidly rotting top of the log. This is one of the many slugs that you'll see moving through this very wet area. This little slug's probably only about 2 inches maximum. The last one we saw was probably 6 to 7 inches long.
Split it. Split it.
Then you cut these things down into, like those blocks over there, they're just the right dimension for shakes, are they?
Yeah, yeah. These are shingle blocks, and they're 16 inches, and those longer ones are 24 inches. Those are shakes, and they take them to the mill and saw the shingles and split the shakes.
Huh. Neat.
These are flown out by helicopter.
They are flown out, eh? How often do they do that?
I'm gonna try and get one on the 15th, this next week, next Wednesday.
And you just bundle them with rope like that, and then they just pick them up, eh?
Yeah, yeah.
Sounds like a lot of fun.
Take them right to the road.
Really?
And these people stop on the road here. They go. It's pretty funny.
Well, I imagine compared to the way you were doing logging 5 years ago, it's kind of a surprise to you too, isn't it?
Well, how's that?
Well, I mean, to bring in helicopters in and that you're working on stumps and...
There's been a lot of different ways of logging. They use balloons and stuff even.
Yeah.
You know, use helium balloons.
Jeez.
You know, they got them tied onto the logs.
Yeah.
You know, they got them tied down, and they just let the balloon go up and carry
Huh.
the logs out.
Huh.
I've seen, you know, that, and they've used helicopters for a long time. This is just,
That's great.
This is a salvage. You know,
How many years have they been doing this kind of salvaging?
long time. You know, probably 50
Oh,
years
okay.
anyway.
I'll be darned. I didn't realize that.
Yeah,
Is it more intensive as the logging industry starts to run short of first growth timber to use?
it's well, it'll be here a lot longer than than that type of logging.
Yeah.
It'll be here for a while anyway. You know, but it'll peter out too. You know.
Eventually, yeah.
See this shake that we cut right here. This area has been gone through once before by cutters just like us.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so this is like the second time through. That's why back about 10, 12 years ago when I was cutting shakes back in high school, we didn't even fool around with stumps. We just creamed it. Cut the logs that are sitting on top and some of the good stuff that was on the bottom.
Huh.
And they didn't fool around with cutting shingles out here. They cut shakes or creamer flat saw.
Huh.
And now they're going through again. Now they're cutting the stumps and cutting all shingles.
20 years from now, what will they be going after? What you're standing on and you leave?
Probably wood chips.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
They'll probably find a new use for a new cancer cure.
Out of old stumps, right?
Yeah.
Huh. Well, that's great.
Hey, what's true about that yew tree now?
Yeah.
They're going, you know.
Yeah.
I heard something about it. It's a threatened species now, I guess, because I guess they got that cancer cure out of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, it is. There's no telling what the industry will be right here on this spot 25, 50 years from now.
Oh, sure. You know. They'd be back here just picking up old.
Boxing and sawdust.
What's fascinating out here is like I got a windfall over there, and it's probably a 700 or 800 year old tree, and it's underneath this other 500-year-old tree. The 500-year-old tree grew up on top of it.
Huh.
Pretty, you know.
Yeah.
You might tell your students that.
You just did.